Greetings, fellow Who-gazers, and welcome back to Doctor Who Literature, the podcast taking you to the world of the Target novelizations in publication order. My name is Jason, and I'm your host on this journey, this very long journey. This is ordinarily the part of the program where we talk about events that are going on in the world of Doctor Who and what other podcasts you might be able to find me on. Here at the beginning of June, there's not a lot to discuss, so what I'd like to do instead is introduce my very first interview guest. I'm very, very excited to speak to him and hear from him, and I'm sure you're going to be very, very excited to listen. Let's get to it. Between 1974 and 1977, there were 16 complete Doctor Who serials released between the Ark in Space and the Talons of Weng-Chiang. Of those 16 stories, 8 of them were ranked in the top 22 all-time by Doctor Who magazine in a poll that ran in the year 2014. That is a remarkable run of success, and it is down very largely to the show's producer during those 3 years, Philip Hinchcliffe. I am very thrilled and delighted today to be joined by Mr. Philip Hinchcliffe. Philip, thank you very, very much for joining us today.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for listening to me.
Philip, you have talked quite a bit on the DVD range, the original DVDs and now the Blu-rays, about your time on the show and about your TV episodes. So that's a very, very good material, and I am sure that all of my listeners have all those box sets or are in the process of getting them. What I want to talk to you about today primarily are the novelizations. You did 3 different novelizations. You did The Keys of Marinus, you wrote The Mask of Mandragora, and the very first one that you wrote came out in February 1977, and it is the subject of our episode of Doctor Who Literature today, The Seeds of Doom.
That's right. I remember it well.
So I wanted to talk generally, when you first started as producer, that would have been, I assume, mid to late 1974. The novelizations had just started earlier that year. The first original Target books came out in January 74.
Oh, right. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they started up in 73 by reprinting some old books, and then the original books for Target came out in January 74. Terrence Dix did one, and Malcolm Hulke did the other.
Oh, yes, I remember now. Malcolm Hulke. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, I had joined the BBC about then, and I was beginning to trail the program. So I met Terence, and I now remember. I thought he'd been writing them for longer than that. I didn't realize that he started then. But I do remember that he and Malcolm Hulke, they did talk to me about starting the stories. Yeah.
Terence was very prolific. So by 1977, in the first 3 years, he had probably written more than half the books by that point. So once he left the script editor position, he was very, very busy writing up to 8 or 9 books a year, which is just incredible pace.
Yes, he was. Yeah, I mean, you just turned around and he'd written another one, and then started. I think he probably started on his own stories, that he'd worked on with Barry, but I think he then they seemed to be popular, so I guess he then started doing the back catalogue as well.
Yes, I think in the final analysis, he ended up doing novelizations for each of the first 6 Doctors, even though he only worked directly on the show for about 3 or 4 of them. So a very impressive run.
Wow, yeah. You got to love the program to do that.
8 books a year is a lot. Certainly. You're either working on Doctor Who or watching Doctor Who or reading about Doctor Who, which even for someone like me can be a bit much.
They're not too bad. I think they're about 50,000 words, which is manageable.
When you were the producer of the show, did you have any editorial input into the novelizations? So, for example, did you say, I would like you to novelize this story next, or did you have any input into the text?
No, not at all. I don't know the company. They were called Target, I think. I can't remember. But anyway, the publishers made all those decisions.
What I had always thought in my head is that you began writing your novelizations after your time in the Doctor Who production office came to a close. What came as a surprise to me is that Seeds of Doom was actually released in February 1977. So you would watch Robots of Death Part 3, go to the store and buy the book, and then the following Saturday you'd watch Robots of Death Part 4. That means you were writing the book almost certainly while you were producing the show, which is also an incredible pace. Do you recall how you first got approached to write Seeds of Doom and where you were in terms of making the show when you wrote it?
Yeah, you surprised me with those dates, but I don't doubt you at all. Basically, I was too busy to write scripts and be producer, and also it went against the grain at the time at the BBC that you couldn't be seen to be self-commissioning because you were taking work from writers who were members of the Writers Guild. We didn't have animals like the showrunners that you have today, like Russell T. Davies, which was very much the American model at the time. So I knew that I couldn't write any of the scripts, even if I'd had the time and energy. It was a big enough job just being the producer because it was such a difficult show to do. So I thought, oh, it'd be quite nice to sort of maybe have a go at one of the novelizations. So I don't know who I spoke to, but probably the publisher, and said, look, I don't mind doing one of these. And they said, oh, yeah, what would you like to do? I thought, well, I'd like to do one that I'd produced because I knew the story, I knew the actors, I knew everything about it. It would be easy. So, the writer of that, Bob Back-Stewart, became a sort of good friend. And I don't know whether I chose that or whether the publishers suggested it as the first one they wanted. So anyway, I did it. My memory is that I wrote it, half of it was written in Slough Library, because I thought I couldn't do it at home because too much distraction. So I just took myself off to the library, and there I was amongst a bunch of students who, 10 years before I was there, mugging up for my school leaving exams. And then 10 years later, I'm in there writing a book about this series that I'd produced. So I wrote half of it there. And then I remember, unless I'm getting confused here, I remember that I went for a week's holiday by myself, actually, in Madeira, or with a family member. And I think I finished it off there. I sort of worked in the morning and then sunbathed in the afternoon. And that would have been, yes, probably at some point early on in the spring. But, it's such a long time ago. I get these things confused. And maybe I'm getting confused with the writing time I took out for Mask of Mandragora. But it didn't take very long, actually, to write these. Because the program was in my head, I could, see it. So, it was only a matter of a few weeks, to get one written.
Writing these at night, so in other words, producing the show during the day and then going to the library after work, or were these written on weekends or perhaps?
Well, no, because my producing finished, it just crossed over into 77, didn't it? And what I was doing then was, there was the last post-production sort of bits and bobs of Talons of Weng Chiang. But so I was wrapping that up, but I was really busy because I was preparing a new cop show series from scratch, which wasn't in good shape. And I had to write a new pilot with the director. So that's what I was busy doing then. I don't remember how I fitted this in altogether. I don't know when I wrote it. You tell me when I wrote it. But so it wasn't that I was working on Who. It was all winding down on Doctor Who, but this huge sort of a challenge was on my plate to get this new series up and running and get scripts in for that. That was the big problem. I don't know how I fitted. This must have been sort of downtime, relaxation, writing this book.
I'm feeling tired just hearing this. And the cop show is called Target, and at the same
That's
time,
right.
you're writing a novelization for Target Books.
Yeah, I don't think they were saying. Yeah, it was just one of those funny, popular name at the time.
So, were you writing on a word processor or a typewriter or in longhand, perhaps?
Longhand.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
I don't think we had word processors then. So I would write in longhand, illegible longhand, and then I would type it up, making changes when I typed it up on a typewriter, an old Smith Corona, and given to me by one of my best friends, Robert Lacey. You may well know in a different guise. He's a royal commentator who works for British television. Well, he's a historian, actually. He's written a lot of Queen books about the royal family, but he works for one of the major American networks and comments on royal matters, and he gave me his Smith Corona portable, which was great. And I had it for years and years and wrote everything on it, scripts, books, everything. So, yeah, that's what I did. Yeah.
I will thank the typewriter if I ever see it for all the hours of pleasure that typewriter has given me as a Doctor Who reader and viewer, for sure.
Yeah, it's gone to this typewriters in the sky.
Was there a lot of editorial work done on Seeds of Doom? Did you have somebody looking at the pages and giving you notes, or was it accepted pretty much as is?
No changes at all. You just handed it in. That was it. Yeah.
So what I have in front of me today is the U.S. reprint of the book with a different logo put up by a New York-based company called Pinnacle Books.
Yeah. This is mine, which is the original.
Oh yes,
yeah, so that's the publisher's freebie that he gave me. And
that's in terrific shape. That was the Mask of Mandragora with.
Oh, sorry, hang on. Here we go.
Tom Baker.
There's a Suzanne. Yeah.
Oh, that is a gorgeous cover with the crinoid and the explosions. It's very similar to the American cover too, actually. Although the American cover is at night with the moon, so it's a little darker.
Yeah, I think I like that one. Yeah.
So one of the things that I noticed reading the book is that you don't include all of the scenes that were shot for television. So a lot of Tom Baker jokey lines that sound as if they may have been ad-libs were not in the book, and the character of Amelia Dukas, the flower artist, she's in a scene in the book, but there's a lot of material in the back half of the TV story where she kind of serves as a plot distraction and as an agent. All that is taken out of the book. When you were looking at the TV story, how did you decide which scenes you were going to adapt and which scenes you were going to trim down?
I can't really remember in detail. You're saying that the TV series had more scenes with that character, and I cut those scenes out in the novelization. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it's a 6-part story, so it's a very long script, but you have to fit into the target page count and word count, I should say. So some material has to go.
Yes, I think I don't know the reason why it went. One of the reasons might have been that at the scripting stage of the TV series, it was clear that nice as she was as a character, it was padding and a little bit too much. She had too much material, really. So we cut her down a lot, but obviously there was still a fair bit, sort of, she added color and, whatever, to the series. But I think in my mind, she was not essential to the plot. And I think that what you have to do with the sort of intelligent young reader is to keep the thing moving, keep it direct, and use, sort of imaginative vocabulary, but keep it relatively straightforward, and also give it a pace. These kids want to read it, almost like they're watching an exciting, adventure story. And so probably I felt that to keep the streamlined sort of feel to the story, maybe those scenes were a bit too much of a diversion, perhaps. That might be the reason. But if there was a word count problem, which I can't recall, they would have been the scenes that would have gone as well. Yeah.
Right. They don't directly impact the plot. There's a scene towards the end of the story where she is talking to the civil servant character, Sir Colin Thackeray, and she's insulting civil servants in general, and he gets defensive. And that can be wonderful material if you have the right actors, but it doesn't necessarily appeal to the 9-year-old reader who's trying to get to the end of the story.
That's right. You got it right. It's the 9-year-old reader who, wants to consume you, and I think that what I enjoyed about writing the novels was to find out, actually, I can write an adventure story because there's a lot of any novelist will tell you, there's a lot of hard graft in fact, you may have written them yourself, but there's hard graft in setting the scene, introducing the characters with enough detail, but not too much. And that's a real art. You have to learn. All novelists are different, and some give you a lot more information than others. But with an adventure story, you do have to set the scene and create the atmosphere, and also give some hint of the inner life of the key characters. Obviously, you don't give really an insight into the Doctor's inner life, which is a key thing about how the Doctor is handled, as a mythic figure, really, in the story and in the whole, sort of culture of Doctor Who stories. But I found all that, I was learning on the job how to do that, and it was great fun. I didn't look down or be patronizing about the young viewer or the reader, because I remember as a kid, consuming this sort of stuff, the Knights of King Arthur, and I would read stuff that is really difficult now, like the original Kidnapped and Coral Island. That's tough stuff, for 10-year-olds today, let alone then. And I've been quoted on this, but I remember reading Brave New World when I was about 10 or 11. I staggered through it, but so I think today's readers, my readers at that time, they can deal with a fair bit, but you have to you just have to sort of simplify a bit, but without being patronizing or condescending. You really need to sort of, what you do is you discover the little boy, the excited little boy in yourself, and you write for that. That's the trick, I think. And I discovered I could do that. And because I knew the stories so well, because I'd helped, create the stories and present them, the way they looked, and chose the actors, and you could use little details of the real actors, feed that into the novelization, which is terrific, so it's great help. So I guess I've been thinking since, you asked me to do this, what was the experience of writing them like? And although I can't remember all these sort of factual details, that process was what I've described. It would be kind of the process, and so you have to really flesh out what's not there. There's no pictures, so you've got to create the pictures again in a different way.
And this would not be a situation like today where you have the television or the laptop screen on and you're watching the story with one eye while typing it on the other screen on the iPad on the other eye. You were doing this from memory, essentially, without the flickering video in front of you.
Yeah, yes, no, there was no, I didn't have the video. The only time I had video sort of in front of me, but it wasn't it. But I agreed to do another book, The Keys of Marinus, which was nothing, and I wish I hadn't said yes, because I don't know why. I mean, because they paid you peanuts, but anyway, I agreed, and it was one of the original stories. I'd never seen it. There were some episodes still extant in ropey black and white film, and so I looked at those, but I think I had to go somewhere to look at those, and certainly couldn't look at them at home or on a VHS or anything like that. I'm not sure they'd actually invented VHSs there when I was doing this. I think we still had those big Philips or Sony things. So you had to go somewhere with a big machine that could play them. So that was the only one that I kind of did, that I didn't have the pictures in my head, if you know what I mean. That's why I don't think it was a very good book. But I tried anyway.
I will tell you that I got Keys of Marinus at my first Doctor Who convention when I was 11 going on 12 in the summer of 1985. And having bought 5 or 6 books, I immediately started reading them in story order, which is what an obsessive 11-year-old fan does. And I got about 80% of the way through Keys of Marinus, just sitting in the hotel lobby between convention events. And that was when I discovered there's a big trial scene towards the end of Keys of Marinus, the book, and the way that you wrote it captivated me. I became the only 11-year-old in the city of New York who realized that he loved courtroom drama. And now, flash forward almost 40 years, that is literally what I do for a living. So that book helped inspire me in large part, so I certainly thank you for that.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
And I want to just come back to a couple of points you mentioned. You mentioned bringing details about the actors to the book. Something that fascinated me when I was 11 or 12, the first time I would have read Seeds of Doom, at least in the American edition, it mentions that the Fourth Doctor weighs 217 pounds, which is a wonderfully specific detail. Do you know if that was the actual number or if you were just making that up for verisimilitude?
I don't remember that. It wouldn't have been pounds anyway, because we do stones. So I don't think I don't remember that, no.
I know the Pinnacle books in the U.S. were lightly edited for the American reader, so they would change the punctuation and the spelling. I unfortunately don't have the original copy, so I don't know what it says in the Target book, but it says 217 pounds here in the U.S. reprint. And
is that because a character is talking about his weight in the episodes?
So there's a moment in the middle of the story where the Doctor and Sarah Jane are kidnapped by a chauffeur who's working for Harrison Chase, who's the story's villain. The Doctor is trying to fight back against the chauffeur. The Doctor eyed the drop one more time, noted the position of the revolver, and launched himself into space. Thud! Exclamation point. The chauffeur crumpled like a rag doll as the Doctor's 217 pounds slammed into him, is the actual line on page 49 of the Pinnacle book. That's in the middle of towards the beginning of chapter 5, if you have your copy in front of you.
In the middle of chapter 5?
Yes, I wouldn't have the actual page number.
Yeah, and here we are. Oh, yes. What I wrote was, I did. The chauffeur crumpled like a rag doll as the Doctor's 15.5 stones slammed into him.
Oh, wow.
I think I must have asked Tom how much he weighed. Or I guess I must have found that out somehow.
And somebody sitting in the Pinnacle production offices on 42nd Street in Manhattan sat there with their slide rule and calculated 15.5 stone into 217 pounds.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
So I have a daughter now who is the same age that I was when I first read these books, 11 years old, and following her education and sitting on her school board. What I've noticed is that books for American children today are heavily regimented in terms of word count and vocabulary. So everyone is assigned a reading level in school, and you can only read books that are specifically tailored to that reading level. So for the primary grades, it goes from levels A through Z, or Z, I suppose. And now that she's closer to high school, they have middle grade fiction and YA fiction. everything is very heavily regimented and tailored towards specific age groups, which is not the way that I was raised in the 70s and 80s, when you would read whatever you could get your hands on, even if you couldn't quite decode it. One of the things that just grabs me today, looking at Mask of Mandragora, which I have coming up on this program in a few months, the vocabulary in Mask of Mandragora, and here I am, a reader in my mid to late 40s. I was looking up some of those words myself because I wasn't familiar with them. So you had an incredibly rich vocabulary style writing these books. And another line that stayed with me in the Seeds of Doom book, I read it at 11 or 12, and I've never forgotten it. You refer to Scorby, who's played by John Chalice. You refer to him as a repressed psychopath, which I thought was a wonderfully compact and descriptive phrase, and it fits the character like a hand in a glove. Do you recall if you were paying homage to other writers with certain turns of phrase or vocabulary words? You had mentioned, of course, some of the books that had a big influence on you when you were a younger reader. Do you recall if you were consciously trying to emulate anybody else's style?
No, not really. I think I'd probably worked out how people wrote crime stories, because I'd read a fair bit, like, I suppose, Earl Stanley Gardner and sort of Raymond Chandler, and well, I've read a lot, I mean, I've read, I think I must have read the odd Alistair MacLean, I remember reading at some point, and I may have read the Bond movies, but I had a lot of literary background. I did English literature at Cambridge, so I've read a lot. But I don't know. I just no, I didn't model myself on anybody. I just thought, keep it. It must be imaginative in some way, and a bit of cliche is okay. I mean, of course, because actually cliches are cliches for a reason, because they're very economical descriptions of things. And so, I've just read a little bit before I spoke to you, and I just read a few of the early, and I see that I've used a character says something, he has a feeling of impending doom. You couldn't have a better cliche than that. But that's useful for the younger. They might not have heard that phrase before. But you can't just rely on cliches. You have to coin your own original twist on a description. And I think the easy thing, what's so easy about it, of these novelizations, you've got the image in your head. Instead of having to sort of conjure up the image and then come up with the phrase that describes what you're seeing in your mind, you just remember what you saw on the screen. And, and usually the words, the useful little phrases and things, come to mind. So I think I just was responding to how do you turn a screenplay into a novel. It's usually the other way around. So it was a direct sort of response to the screenplay itself that, if you like, formulated this style that I fell into. If that makes sense to you.
No, it certainly does. And the phrase repressed psychopath I thought was so good that I'm surprised I haven't seen it turn up in other works of literature, because it really fits the character so well. And it really gets down to the heart of John Chalice's performance on TV, which even to this day, 40 plus years later, is one of my favorite Doctor Who guest villain turns. I thought he was a wonderful character.
Yeah.
I guess my last question is, in preparation for your writing the novelization, were you given any of the earlier books, such as the Terrance Dicks books, to read? Do you recall that?
Don't think so. I might have done, but I can't remember. I might have dipped into the book he'd written because it might have just given me an idea of the style and what the target audience was and how he did it. So I'm probably think that I did dip into it, but I don't remember, that well that I made a big thing about it. But I probably would have had a quick look at it. Yeah.
Well, Philip Hinchcliffe, thank you very, very much for your time and your generosity and your memories and for talking to me on Doctor Who literature. Thank you as well for all the TV stories you've given us and for the books, which, like I said, Keys of Marinus was a direct influence on my career. So I certainly owe your books a lot.
Well, thank you for that. It's nice to think that these things that I wrote so long ago sort of have a life, and that they've I don't know, been enjoyed by so many people. That's great. Thank you very much.
I didn't envision at age 11 that I'd be podcasting about these books for so much time later on, but I'm certainly glad that I discovered them, and I'm glad that you got to write 3 of them.
Great. Thank you very much.
And that was my interview with the legendary Philip Hinchcliffe, recorded in mid-May. Very excited to talk to him and pick his brain and hear his stories. Coming up after the break, we're going to welcome my conversation of the week with a friend of mine from Doctor Who New York fandom, Shannon Dohar. Coming up right after this.
Get your hands up. Turn around, Doctor. Facing this way.
We annoyed
Shut
you
up.
or something?
Okay, stop talking.
Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart had perfect pitch.
What happened to him?
Who, Wolfgang Amadeus? Oh, him. Oh, he died.
How did that happen?
It happened because of a pod.
The pod? Look, Doctor, there's already 1 corpse in here. I could easily double that number.
Look, he's
Stay
telling
where
you
you
the
are.
truth.
There's been an accident. One of the men was infected.
By the pod?
He went mad.
Yes. You could say he's not quite himself.
Where is he now?
We don't know. Somewhere out there.
Oh, you mean you have a homicidal maniac on the loose?
Oh, much more dangerous than that, and he's desperate for food and warmth. But there's only one place he can find food and warmth.
You mean this camp?
It's a comforting thought, isn't it? I think we should lock all the doors and windows.
What are we going to do, Scrooby?
I think it's time we got some real answers. They're not in here. Why don't we make ourselves a little more comfortable? Come on, move.
All right, we're back, and we are now discussing Doctor Who and the Seeds of Doom with my friend Shannon Dohar. Shannon, I've had this podcast for about 7 months now. You were only my second guest who, like me, is a fellow New Yorker, so welcome very much to the show.
Thank you very much. We need more New York representation in the fandom, I guess. Sheesh.
We definitely do. My over-the-top accent is feeling a little bit lonely here.
Well, I can't help you on the accent. I wasn't raised here, but I've been here for about 12 years, so I think that counts for something.
So, Shannon, how long have you been a Doctor Who fan?
I have been a Doctor Who person since I was very little, probably like 5 or 6. My father was a fan. His doctor is John Pertwee. And so as soon as the local PBS station started rerunning old episodes of Doctor Who, then my curfew on Friday and Saturday nights went straight to hell. And he would let me stay up late and watch Doctor Who with him.
What was the very first episode that you remember seeing?
I have no idea. I have this thing with the sci-fi franchises that have been in my life for the longest time. So things like Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who. I don't remember the first moments of watching any of them. And I wish that I did, right? Like you wish that you have that memory. But I do not. I have a really firm memory of the PBS pledge drives and the fact that we would wait for the PBS pledge drives and buy a stack of like 6 blank VHSs and just fill in the collection based on whatever was airing for that pledge drive. But it was always, Tom Baker was always my doctor. So those were always the ones that were most special.
So, how did you come to the novelizations then? I know with our PBS station, they would occasionally give away novelizations as pledge drive gifts, but I came to the books a little bit differently. How about yourself?
Yeah, so I came to the books probably, I had been a fan for a couple of years. I was probably in my around 10 or 11. And it was that age that I was just voraciously reading everything that I could get my hands on at the library that was even tangentially related to anything that I liked. So I was reading all sorts of mythology, all sorts of literature that was way too above my head for, 10 or 11. I think I read Moby Dick around that time too.
Oh my
Don't
goodness,
ask me
my
why.
condolences.
It scarred me for life. But I remember there was this shelf in the kids section of the library, like the YA section of the library. And it was a hodgepodge of Doctor Who novels, the Target novelizations and the New Adventure books. And my dad was a fan, as I said, but I certainly was not in any formal sense in fandom. So I didn't know the difference. And I just got very excited for additional Doctor Who material. So I would kind of barrel through as many as I could, and some more than once. And, definitely I can't confirm that I would have read the Seeds of Doom novelization before now, but I'm pretty positive. I'm pretty sure I did.
So, talking about the New Adventures, I met you through Graham Burke, because when Graham would come to New York and do a live reality bomb every year or so, you have been his co-host. So that was how I met you originally,
Mm-hmm.
and you and I know have been at the same conventions. When you were reading the New Adventures in your youth, and you read about Graham the Spatula in the book Return of the Living Dad, did you have any idea that you would become friends and colleagues with that Graham years and years later?
Never in a million years, no. It's not something that I could have guessed that would happen in my life. But, I couldn't have guessed the amount of connections and joy and really family that I would have gotten out of the formal fandom when I was that age. I always suspected you would see these kind of groups of people in the pictures at Doctor Who magazine and know that there was a world out there where more people other than me and my father loved this show. But I could never have imagined everything that it's brought me.
Yeah, for me, Doctor Who has definitely been the fandom that keeps on giving. I would have watched Seeds of Doom for the first time when I was 11 years old, and I was instantly riveted with how good it is and how graphically violent it is, which definitely appealed to the 11-year-old boy in me. And when I was talking to Philip earlier, I realized that I could recall whole passages from the novelization which had been lodged in my head since I was 11 years old. So that had an incredible power over me. And getting to speak to the man who commissioned the story and wrote the novelization was a profoundly transcendent experience. So,
That's remarkable. Yeah.
having been a fan now for nearly 40 years, I've definitely had some amazing journeys. And you would have seen my name in the New Adventures as well. My name also appears in Return of the Living Dad and Happy Ending. So here we are, face to
There you
face,
go. Here we are.
fresh off the pages of the book. Now, you have done work on Reality Bomb. You and I were both in Reality Bomb 100, which was shot live in Queens a few weeks ago as we record
Sure
this.
was. What a joyful experience. Really, really fun.
But you have been on several other podcasts as well, both musical podcasts. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, sure. So I'm always honored to show up on Reality Bomb whenever Graham and Joy need me to. But my two main podcasting projects are actually both with Doctor Who fans and not about Doctor Who. So Mr. Graham Burke of Spatula fame and I, along with his old friend Rob Jones, who has now become a dear friend of mine as well, have a podcast called Deeper Cuts, where we talk about albums that meant something to us at some substantial point in our lives, and we do a deep dive onto that album. That runs seasonally. So this summer of 2022, one of our mini series will start, and then the full series will start up later in the fall. And then on a twice monthly basis, I do a show about musicals with Eric Stadnick, also of Doctor Who fandom. And we focus in on a series of songs, 4-episode arcs each, throughout the cycle. And so we'll do like a series on, say, opening numbers, closing numbers, songs from mega musicals is what's about to kick off for us there. So it's two very different podcasts about very different forms of music, but both of them have come to my life through Doctor Who.
again, the fandom that keeps on giving.
Indeed, indeed. And the podcast with Eric is called "So Much Stuff to Sing." I'm realizing I did not give you the name, so that's what that one's called.
Yeah, I would encourage everybody to find those. I remember my parents didn't take me to a lot of musicals when I was a kid growing up in the New York City suburbs. I know in the early 80s I saw Annie on Broadway and I saw Pirates of Penzance on Broadway.
What a combination.
It really was. I can no longer recall if I would have seen Kevin Kline and Linda Ronstadt or if I saw a later cast for Pirates of Penzance, but there are a couple of clips of the original performance circulating around on YouTube which bring me right back. Annie, I saw Allison Smith, who was not the original Annie, but that fact I happen to remember because she has the same first name as my kid's sister. Then I didn't see a musical on Broadway again for quite a long time after that. But my mom would go to shows a lot, and she would bring back playbills. I remember this is probably one of the earliest expressions of my being a Doctor Who geek. She saw Christopher Benjamin, who had been in a couple of classic Doctor Who stories, and then later on in one new series adventure. She saw him on Broadway in Speed the Plow, and she brought back the playbill, and I immediately recognized his name and his photo from Talons of Weng-Chiang and
There
Inferno.
you go. Yeah.
Which was, I guess, a very poor use of my fandom powers. That's what excited me. Not the play, but the fact that he had been in Talons of Weng-Chiang at that point 10 or 15 years earlier.
It's an important piece of fandom for all of us to run around like nudging the people that we're with, saying that person was in Doctor Who. Do you know that person was in Doctor Who? Let me tell you about the episode of Doctor Who that person was in.
That has caused a lot of people to tune out of my conversation over the years. So, we are talking today about the Seeds of Doom book, and I'll show you my copy. I have the Pinnacle edition, which were very ubiquitous in the States in the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
So I've never actually seen this in the Target form. I've only ever seen the very moody Pinnacle cover. And Philip and I were comparing notes earlier because he has obviously the Target original, and we can see what lines and measurements were changed for the American audience. But other than the odd changed pronunciation or the translation of stones into pounds, it is of course the same book. You probably read this when you were younger. Looking back on it now, reading it a few years later, how did your memories hold up?
I am a little bit of an over-preparer, so I also watched it. So I rewatched and reread Seeds of Doom, and it's all a bit of a haze. A lot of those Tom Baker and Philip Hinchcliffe and Sarah Jane episodes, but there are a couple of memories that I always still have that kind of shine through. And for Seeds of Doom, I think the great kind of chase scene in the quarry that lasts like not for terribly long, but where the Doctor and Sarah are escaping the evil chauffeur before they find the artist. That has always stuck out to me just because, we love a quarry here in Doctor Who fandom. We can't say no to a quarry, but also just the kind of remarkable image of this gigantic and increasingly huge plant kind of overtaking the mansion of the evil botanist, which is just like so delightful. That stuck in my mind as well.
I know the quarry that they used for the chase with the chauffeur is also the same quarry they used to represent Antarctica in parts 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just another example of the Doctor Who team being very, very creative. And then the Harrison Chase mansion, I believe, was also Mick Jagger's home at the time, which was also used as the mansion in Pyramids of Mars a little bit earlier in the season. So those are the random bits of trivia about the making of Seeds of Doom. Seeds is one of those stories that I never forgot from the very first time that I would have seen it on PBS. This would have been spring 1985, because we had, obviously, my station was airing one episode a night, so part 1, part 2, and then I would just videotape whatever was on Friday night so I could watch it over and over again during the weekends when Doctor Who was not on. Mm-hmm. So that part 3 cliffhanger where Sarah is being threatened with the opening crinoid pod was just something that burned in my head over and over again. It's an incredible cliffhanger. And when I do my cliffhanger panel at LI Who every year, that's one of the ones that I show every year. And that always It's a good reaction out of the audience.
And that is one I think that it hits much more effectively in the novelization. Like, it's a great cliffhanger, and it's a great cliffhanger in the episode itself, but the perspectives that are chosen in the novelization are so effective at really kind of even taking it to another level and amping it up even more, to have that kind of true panic of the cliffhanger. It's just so good in the novelization.
So this is an example of how Philip can take the script and his memories of the TV serial and, like you say, take it to the next level. Already the pod was beginning to throb and split in places. Chase stood gloating at the sight like a fiend possessed, which is another great description. And then he switches POV to the doctor, so you're actually seeing the last paragraph of the chapter through the doctor's eyes, which,
Yeah.
You're right, that's a really inventive way of looking at it, and it brings the horror home. Although, I guess we are missing Sarah's POV in the middle of all this.
Yeah, but we've got, there's several moments where we're coming from her perspective, and it's kind of the sheer horror, and you can imagine her brain kind of just like fritzing when you're at that level of panic, because that is one of the ones especially where she would see no way out of that.
Until the doctor comes crashing through the skylight.
Always.
In terms of the TV story, one of the things that I like about it is I think, and this is a cliche because you hear it on every audio commentary, you have these directors in their 70s saying it really holds up, looking at a very flimsy piece of rushed filmmaking from the 1960s. But I think that actually works for Seeds of Doom, because if you look at the model of the crinoid engulfing the mansion, especially in the last two parts of the story, I think it holds up really, really well today. I think the crinoid is probably the monster prop that has aged the best. Well, apart from maybe the Dalek props, I think it looks really effective today. If you were to do it now as a CGI, I don't think it would look as good as it does on television here.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think that's fair. It's it would be a little bit too flat. It would have that like CGI kind of overly fake looking, where it's so shiny it just like crosses the other way.
Right. Where does the Hinchcliffe era rank for you? Because you would have seen, as you say, a lot of it growing up, and it would have blurred together. Looking back on it now, I was surprised to go to the DWM poll from the 50th anniversary. Of the top 22 stories of all time, from 63 to 2014, 8 of the top 22 are Phillips, and he only made 16. So that's a really good run of success. That'll do well for you. How does his era hold up for you in terms of all that? Because now, of course, we've seen everything from Doctors 1 through 13. We have a much broader view.
Yeah, but I think, it's kind of like how the era of SNL when you were a kid is always the best era of SNL, like regardless of when it was like the one that you grew up with, right? And so for me, this is the one that I grew up with. Like, this is the Doctor that I imprinted on, and the companion that I imprinted on, and the type of story that I really, really loved. And so for me, I would rank them very, very highly. I also think that a lot of that is down to nostalgia, and I don't really care because it's Doctor Who. It's been around for, almost 60 years, and we're lifelong fans, and we can be nostalgic about our favorite eras.
Nostalgia is definitely a big part of the appeal. I was watching. I'm towards the latter stages of my pilgrimage now, so I got up to The Snowman last night, the 2012 Moffat Christmas special, and that is essentially a stealth prequel to The Web of Fear. So the Doctor menaces Ian McKellen with a tin that has the map of the London Underground circa 1967. And he shows it to the Great Intelligence, and that, of course, ends up being the reason why the Great Intelligence occupies the Underground in the earlier story. So even watching modern-day Doctor Who, there's a ton of nostalgia that runs through it. And I think that's a very important factor in the show's success, because it has this remarkable, rich past that it can go to and relive over and over again.
Indeed, yeah.
So when did you first start watching the new series? So obviously, you, like me, would have grown up seeing the series on PBS. How did you find out the show was coming back? When did you first start watching maybe the Christopher Eccleston years?
No, so this was another moment of my father kind of guiding my fandom. So he found out first and got the DVDs from Netflix, and I threw a hissy fit. And I was like, I do not want any part of this.
Wow.
Where are my old Gallifreyan hats? Where are the aliens that are just covered in plastic? I'm not interested. This is too shiny and too like modern looking, and that's not Doctor Who, and I'm fine, thank you, good night. And really kicked and screamed. So it wasn't until and my father like kept trying to get me to watch those DVDs with him. Unfortunately for him, it was the era that Netflix, you would order the pack of DVDs and you would get them in order and you'd be running through them. And I was home from college on a break, and he finally, after a solid year of trying to get me to watch Doctor Who, finally, the modern Doctor Who, put me in front of it. And unfortunately for him, the DVD that he was up to was the Daleks Take Manhattan.
Oh my.
I just kind of was like, my point stands. Like, I don't like you, this is what you want me to watch? Like, no, Dad, no. And he was like, I swear it's normally better than this. So it was actually not until just before, probably maybe 2 or so years before the 50th, that I finally came around and watched Midnight with a good friend and was like, oh, okay, maybe there is something to this. And then I went back and started from Eccles and barreled through. So it was a long path to get me to watch Modern Who.
You had to find the series on your own terms.
Yeah.
Who is your favorite Doctor from the current series then? Because we're now up to, well, we have 5 main Doctors from Christopher to Jodie, and then of course we have Joe Martin and we have John Hurt as sort of stealth Doctors. So really we have 7. Who's your favorite out of the bunch?
Capaldi. Capaldi's my doctor. And he's the only one who's ever given Tom a real run for his money. That, like, I mean, I've always also loved David Tennant, but Peter Capaldi is like, more days than not, I would say he's my doctor now. Just of the whole shebang.
I think that brings us back full circle, because when you look at the way the Doctors are playing the role, Peter obviously was a massive Doctor Who fan in his youth, more so than we ever were, which is saying something. When I'm watching his performance, I am seeing a lot of early Tom Baker because of the moodiness, and particularly in Mummies on the Orient Express, there are moments in there when I am convinced he is directly impersonating Tom Baker.
Oh, he is. Yeah. For Mummy specifically, there's definitely moments where he's just like fully doing a Tom Baker impression.
And I know that Kill the Moon has divided fandom among certain fault lines, but if you only watch the first half of the story before the revelation about the moon being an egg, which drove certain parts of fandom out of their mind, the first 20 minutes of that, I think the brief that Moffat gave to the writer was Hinchcliffe this as much as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that era is kind of very Hinchcliffe-y. It's a lot darker than what came before or after. It tends to be like pretty spiky, and in the way that, a modern version of Philip Hinchcliffe, I think would be like, it is that like that style that makes you kind of sit back and say, like, is this still a kid's show? Is this still a kid's show?
What appeals to me about the classic series is that it's all plot and it's all story. And I watched the new series a little bit before you. I got the very first download of Rose when it leaked about a month early via the CBC. I was happy to receive that as a gift. So I was watching along. Obviously, this is years before it came to the States, but I was watching along as best as I could, as close to the original air date as possible. And I was hooked at the very beginning because, the series begins with a remake of Spearhead from Space. So what's not to love about that?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that tries my patience as I'm watching the new series and the Pilgrimage is with the classic series, I'm seeing it the way that I saw it when I was 11 or 12, and I love the episodes unreservedly. Even the bad ones, I have probably seen Time Lash or Twin Dilemma more than I've seen almost any new series story. when I watch the new series, I'm not watching it through those wide-eyed children's eyes where I love everything uncritically. I find myself being a lot more analytical and critical. So the new series just has never had. I mean, obviously, I'm still a fan, and I watch every episode as quickly as I can, and I'm happy to discuss them. It just doesn't put me in the same place emotionally as the original series did. Maybe because I'm coming to it later in life, and there's a lot more competition. Maybe because you will never love anything quite as much as you did when you were 11 or 12 years old.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I have not had that experience. I think like I love the modern era of Doctor Who, the Capaldi era, I would say, as unreservedly as I did the Tom Baker era when I was little. And I think, certainly you make excellent points, and there's analytical pieces to our brains that we can't shut off now that we didn't have access to when we were kids. But there is something just like in your soul when you hear the blue box, and that's kind of why that 50th sequence was so effective. That we really do all feel that, I think. And the suspension of disbelief is already so necessary. I will say it bums me out a lot more as an adult when I'm not connecting to the series than it did when I was a kid. When I was a kid, and it would be, a Troughton section, for example, who is like by and away my least favorite Doctor, which is, I know, very, very controversial thing to say. But I could just kind of like move along and be like, whatever, this man annoys me. Like, I'm just going to go back and sit with my Tom Baker. And now when I'm not connecting as much to the show, it weighs more heavily on me. And I have a harder time kind of separating out the fact that it's bumming me out to the experience of the rest of the show. So in that context, I'm closer to that with what you were saying.
Also, with PBS, if you didn't like a story, just wait 5 minutes and it'll be a different episode from a different doctor on a different station the very next day.
It's true. Just hang out for Red Dwarf, too. Just like...
That's right. Or Blake's 7, which we also got on my PBS station immediately after Doctor Who. I watched the opening credits of a lot of Blake's 7 episodes before turning them off.
We never got Blake 7. It was exclusively Red Dwarf.
But when you're watching the new series, if you happen to dislike Flux, and I'm afraid there's a lot of people who fall into that category.
Raise his hand, yeah.
The first 3 episodes of Flux, I was completely unreservedly in love with. And then I came home from Li Who, and everyone who had seen it early at Li Who said episode 4 of The Flux, Village of the Angels, is the best Doctor Who in years. So I came home excited to watch, quote, the best Doctor Who in years, end quote, and I kept waiting for it to get started, and I just could not get into it. And that was the moment that broke Flux for me, because then you have episodes 5 and 6 after that repeatedly fail to stick the landing.
Yeah, I would say Flux broke for me pretty immediately. It broke on delivery.
Kind of delivery. But you have no recourse if you don't like Flux, because other than put on old DVDs, there's nothing else you can do except wait for Legend of the Sea Devils and hope against hope that Legend of the Sea Devils is going to be the story that rescues the entire Chibnall era.
Tragically, then we all had to watch Legend of the Sea Devils. Chibnall has not been my favorite, just to put it bluntly. I struggled with
I think when it comes to Chibnall, you and I are of the same religion, to borrow a quote from Seeds of Doom. Do you have any hope at all for the centenary?
I do. I absolutely got teary at the trailer at seeing Ace and Tegan. I am anxious about how they will be used. I wish that I felt more confident in the showrunner's ability to use them appropriately, and with the necessary respect that they are due. But at the end of the day, like I love Ace is the best. I've always loved Ace. Like if I have to pick a second favorite classic Doctor, it's probably 7. So like I just, I love that era and I love her so much. And so I am cautiously optimistic in spite of myself, because there have been so few moments where I have not been really let down by Chibnall. But I'm letting myself be excited for this because, it's a last hurrah. So hopefully he can go out with a bang. And then we'll launch right into Russell Point 2. And I'm very excited for everything that we're hearing about that sequence. So
It's hard to imagine Janet Fielding walking into a table read and accepting a bad script. I can imagine her and Sophie Aldred saying, "No, this sounds wrong. My character would never do this." I have this hope against hope that if the script was bad, they immediately salvaged it right there at the table read and made everything all right.
it's possible. Listen, I have had faith in Sophie Aldred for most of my life, and I'm not going to stop now.
I would have been a 14 or a 15-year-old boy when I first saw Dragonfire and Remembrance of the Daleks. So obviously, Sophie imprinted herself upon me in a positive way when I was exactly the right age. So I also have complete faith in her. Have you been reading the novelizations of the new series episodes that have been coming out under the Target banner?
I can't say that I have. No. I think part of what I was saying earlier about having a harder time disassociating when I'm not enjoying the current run of the show has really been true for all of the accoutrement. I have heard great things about many of the novelizations, particularly for Day of the Doctor and for Rose, and I've meant to go back to them, but I just haven't had the opportunity.
It's interesting because when you go back to the earliest of the Target books, they were very experimental. They would change the title, they would change the TV story in fundamental ways. There are some novelizations that are novelizations in name only, and they just diverge very, very far from the source material. So with the new series novelizations, a lot of the authors are taking that to heart. So Russell T Davies adds subplots and characters to Rose that were not there on screen. And Day of the Doctors, I I don't love the 50th. There, I said it. I have some problems. I loved it when I first saw it. I saw it at the Village East Theater in November 2013 with a friend of mine. So I would have seen it on the big screen. When I watched it back a few years later, it did not work for me at all, in reasons that I can't quite put my finger on. But I'll be seeing it again in my pilgrimage next week, so I'll be giving it a third shot. But the novelization just plays around with the narrative, and the chapters are numbered out of order. And Moffat has great fun trying to make the reader guess which doctor is narrating any given chapter. And of course, the answer will surprise you at the end of the book.
Of course, yeah.
So that one I'd recommend very highly. The new novelizations I'll be coming to. I'm doing a book a week on this show, and I'm only on book 29 now, so I'm probably 2 or 3 years away from getting to the new novelizations, but you may have your chance to read one from me a couple of years from now.
I'd be happy to.
And speaking of chances, we are now going to give you a chance at a game. And we're going to play, Shannon, you and me, we're going to play 20 questions.
I am so bad at games, Jason.
The good news for you is nobody has failed this game yet. Everybody who has come to play has guessed the show in less than 20.
I am here to embarrass myself.
I have selected from the randomizer.net the title of one random Doctor Who story. And when we're talking about the Heartland, we're talking about the main episode title, not the individual episode parts. So I've picked one serial from 1963 to 2022. I know which one it is. You do not. Using 20 questions, you are going to narrow down 59 years of television, and you are going to guess the story title that I have picked for me on the randomizer.net. Only yes or no questions.
Only yes or no questions. Okay. Is this a classic episode?
Yes, it is. That was question one.
Great.
So you're off to a flying start. You've already cut half the series out. Question two.
Does this episode exist on tape?
Yes, it does. Question three.
Is this episode in color?
Yes, it is. These are see you're narrowing it down. You might actually set the all-time record. Question 4.
Listen. It's gonna get ugly the more specific that it gets. Does this episode have a recurring villain in it?
No, it does not. Question 5.
Okay. So we're in color. We do not have a recurring villain. Is it a Tom Baker story?
Yes, it is. So you've narrowed it down to 7 years out of 60, and that only took 6 questions to do.
I'm at 6 questions, huh? Okay.
Uh-huh.
All right. Let's see. Is this a Key to Time story?
No, it is not.
Okay. Is K9 in this story?
Yes, he is. It is a canine story. Very good.
Okay. Let's see. Tom Baker episodes.
See, K9 narrows it down because he was only in a small section of the Tom Baker
He
years.
does, and now we get to the point where I can't remember what episodes K9 was in.
I will just give you the hint that if you're looking at your online episode guide, he appears in between Invisible Enemy and Warrior's Gate. Now, the bad news for you, the bad news is there are more individual canine stories than you have questions left out of 20.
There certainly are.
You need to be a little more specific in figuring out which one it is.
Okay. All right. Okay. And there's no repeating creature.
Correct. No recurring villain.
Okay.
So that means you can knock Invasion of Time right off the list, for example.
Sure can. Is this a Romana story?
It is not a Romana story.
It is not a Romana story. Okay.
I think we're at the halfway mark now, so you are guaranteed to get this.
You really think that, don't you? Okay. It's not a Romana story.
And that helps you out because if you look at the canine list, most of them are Romanas.
Most of them are, yeah. So it's got to be early. Is it Image of the Fendel?
It is not Image of the Fendel.
Is it a Leela story?
It is a Leela story.
Okay.
But a Leela story that is not Image of the Fendel.
No, I got you. Is it Doctor Who and the Sunmakers?
It is Doctor Who and the Sunmakers.
Look at that. You're right.
Right.
I didn't totally embarrass myself.
You got it. I lost count on the middle, but you got it in about 12 questions. You got it in 12 questions, so that was very good work. That is
not bad.
Graham got it in 8, and then Simon Hart got it in 7, but you definitely fell right in the middle of the pack. You did not embarrass yourself. You didn't fail.
I'll take that.
Now, next time we're going to play Guess That Cliffhanger, so that may be a little more of a test of your abilities, so I'm looking forward to that.
It won't go well for me, Jason.
No one has failed that game yet either, so you have a little bit of time to practice now.
There you go. I got to get myself up to speed.
All right, so let's wrap it up then with one last random observation about Seeds of Doom, the book. So my favorite part of Seeds of Doom when I was a kid would have been the 2-part prologue in Antarctica, because I had been raised by a father who grew up watching 1950s sci-fi films in the theater, and we were early VCR adapters. He got a VCR in the late 70s, renting one from the video store for 6 months, and then eventually buying our own, specifically to tape the old 50s sci-fi movies that were airing in the middle of the night on WGN in Chicago or out of any out-of-town station. So I would have watched The Thing from Another World at far, far too young an age. So when Seeds of Doom came around, I was immediately aware that I was watching The Thing from Another World. Not the John Carpenter version, which I was a little too young for, but the one set in Antarctica with the giant carrot menacing the characters in the military base. So I immediately, right away, got to the point of where the story was supposed to be taking place. So the chapter 4 is the part 2 cliffhanger, and it's Hinchcliffe's countdown How does this prose work for you? Inside, the crinoid pounded the door in a frenzy. 8, 7, 6. It managed to prise one tentacle through. 5, 4. Sarah could see the ridge, only a few yards further. 3, 2. The doctor came in sight of the camp. He opened his mouth to yell. Steve! There was a searing flash of red. The ground shook. A firework seemed to explode in his head. Then he was sinking into a white cloud of nothingness.
It's so
Now,
good.
How is that for a cliffhanger?
It is so good. It's so well done. It's so it's so evocative, and you barely need the episode. Who needs the episode?
Exactly. All right. Well, Shannon, thanks so much for joining me to talk about The Seeds of Doom and your other podcasts and our respective fandom journeys. And thank you for solving 20 questions, so I didn't have to edit out all the wrong answers. Thanks very much for joining me, and we'll do it again someday.
Thanks for having me.
Some visitors, Mr. Chase.
So, the meddling doctor. You lead a charmed life. You arrive without a chauffeur, not even a touch of frostbite.
How do you do? Have you met Miss Smith? She's my best friend.
Is she? And still beautifully intact, I see.
I try my best under the circumstances.
And this is Mr. Scorby. I don't know his first name. And these two gentlemen...
Yes, thank you, Doctor. We are acquainted.
How nice. Hand over the pod.
After all the inconvenience I've been put to, oh no, Doctor. Perhaps you didn't know, but in this house is assembled the greatest collection of rare plants in the world. When the pod flowers, I shall achieve the crowning glory of my life's work.
Take care. I notice a little green fly here and there.
Your envy is understandable, Doctor. However, as I propose to have you both executed...
Why? We haven't harmed you.
Oh, be reasonable, Sarah. What choice has he got? We keep interfering.
Exactly, Doctor. However, before you die, you will be granted a unique privilege. The last things you will ever see will be my beautiful plants. Please come this way.
Look, what are you playing?
Go on your way.
And the West Wing was completed by Sir Bothwell Chase just before his execution in 1587. This plant laboratory is unique, Doctor. It makes the Botanical Institute look like a potting shed.
Oh, we're near the end. I do so hate guided tours.
Here we treat our green friends as patients. If they're puny, we build them up. If they're sick, we give them succor.
I've heard of flower power, but that is ridiculous.
Doctor Who and The Seeds of Doom. Written by Philip Hinchcliffe. Televised as The Seeds of Doom. Teleplay by Robert Banks Stewart. Televised January through March 1976. Published in February 1977. Plants attack man. In the frozen reaches of the Antarctic, deep in the permafrost, the World Ecology Bureau uncovers two of the strangest pods ever known to man. Two pods that have been buried in the ice for 30,000 years. Then, one of the pods is destroyed, and the second is stolen. The pod is an alien crinoid, hostile to all animal life, including man. Only Doctor Who is able to stop its spreading tentacles of destruction. But will he be in time to save mankind? That is the back cover blurb to the 1980 U.S. Pinnacle reprint. Why do we read novelizations? In my case, the answer is, to quote George Mallory, because they're there. To the original 1970s UK Doctor Who fans, the books serve as surrogates for TV stories that could no longer be watched. Home video releases wouldn't start until the 1980s, and TV reruns didn't start until the 90s, unless we were importing dubbed VHS tapes from Australia. But for those UK fans, the books also served as a gateway into reading, and then writing. So while the books began as a way to recapture what a Doctor Who story would have looked like, or felt like on television, if only you could see it, they ended up serving as something more, literature, in and of themselves. Books that mostly work as well for you in your 40s and 50s as they did when you were, say, 8, or 11, or 16. For stateside readers like Shannon and me, we started reading the books, well, because they were there. We were rabid young Doctor Who fans and couldn't get enough of the books as kids. Shannon via her local library, and me because my library didn't stock Doctor Who as my salary for babysitting my kid sister. Actually, on a side note, my library did stock one Doctor Who book on Long Island. First thing I did in early 1985 was run to the card catalog, and yes, I can still smell that combination of wooden drawers and cardboard. And years later, as a student page at that same library, ended up typing some of those card catalog index cards myself. And I would look up Doctor Who. And in 1985, there were only 2 cards that began with those 2 words. Something called, to the best of my recollection, The Doctor Who Loved Nurses. And no, I can't find that title anywhere on any used book sites, although Amazon has some truly horrifying and near-match search results. And the Doctor Who Technical Manual. The latter was a hardcover volume that explored the Doctor's toolkit, or how a Jaggeroth spaceship worked, or how to build your own TARDIS out of construction paper. Spoiler alert, I couldn't. The technical manual spent a lot of time getting checked out by other Doctor Who book readers. No, I never met any of them. And the book later collapsed in on itself, falling apart at the binding. I last saw it when working at that library, as a page in the very early 90s, bound together by rubber bands, and it was probably discarded soon after that, never to be reordered. But for me, the books became an end, in and of themselves. I started reading them because they were Doctor Who. I continued reading them because they were my gateway to stories that I couldn't see on television, or that no longer existed, or because they captured stories that I had seen and loved already. Stay tuned when my guest and I next week discuss this in reference to Doctor Who and the Dalek invasion of Earth. But I kept reading the books because they were such good literature, because I can still learn a lot about the craft of writing, on the building of paragraphs and scenes, by reading Terence Dix. We heard Philip Hinchcliffe talk earlier about how he started writing the books, in part because he couldn't write a TV episode under BBC rules at the time, so certainly the books for him were an invaluable way to learn the art of writing fiction, hands-on. And that brings us to Doctor Who and the Seeds of Doom. There are 2 ways to read this novelization. 1, as a surrogate for the TV serial, and 2, as fiction, in and of itself. In the most reductionist sense, this book no longer needs to exist. We are, you don't need me to tell you, past the point where Doctor Who is impossible to watch, aired once in the UK and then never again. I have Seeds of Doom on the original DVD, a 2-disc beauty with audio commentary, including The Son of Douglas Camfield, with pop-up text production notes, a making-of documentary, and other bonus features. The day is rapidly hoping I approach when we get Seeds on a deluxe Season 13 Blu-ray, and you can get Seeds on BritBox, whatever other streaming services hold the classic series, and probably Daily Motion as well. In other words, you can watch Seeds whenever you want. And as an adaptation of the TV serial, Seeds the book is missing a lot. It's the kind of story whose dialogue you kind of want to swim in or recite whole chunks of in daily life. Inimical. They're lethal, says Tom Baker. Or Franklin Adams, 1881 to 1960. American humorist. That sort of thing. But you won't find those lines in the novelization. The first 11 minutes of Part 1 are reduced to just 8 pages of text, at least in the Pinnacle edition. Whole scenes reduced to a single paragraph of internal monologue. So much of the flavorful dialogue on TV is just gone, reduced in favor of making scenes shorter and more functional. Dunbar's interviews with Harrison Chase, there's one in Part 1 and another in Part 2 on TV, are master classes in word choice and acting, but they're entirely between supporting characters, no regulars, and Hinchcliffe only adapted one of those 2 scenes for the book. The scene is good as written, but your mind, like a tongue probing for a lost tooth, keeps looking for the missing passages. Short expository scenes are also junked. Colin Thackeray's one appearance in Part 1 is not on the novelization. Moberly's explanation as to why Antarctica base is so underpopulated, much of the medical detail about Winlet's condition, and the South Bend radio operator's voice. Not necessary for the plot, but on TV it does serve as invaluable texture. Sarah Jane's best comebacks on TV were largely invented during rehearsals on studio days, so wouldn't be in the camera scripts, and are gone here. Like her line when the doctor says that crinoid pods travel in pairs like policemen. She says, "Buy at a truncheon?" In Part 1 on TV, she also translated the doctor's arguments to Moberly about why Moberly alone must amputate Winlet's arm. You must help yourselves, the Doctor says. In the book, the Doctor proposes, Mobley agrees, and that's it. Part 1 takes up just 19 pages of pinnacle text. Part 2 is a marvel of wordplay on TV. All that incredible byplay between Tom Baker and John Challis in Part 2, Scorby is one of the few human villains in Doctor Who to actually defeat the Doctor, is much reduced. The Dunbar chase scene from Part 2 is, like I said, also excised. That being said, Hinchcliffe does great stuff with the Part 2 cliffhanger in Chapter 4, a literal bomb-ticking countdown, and the death of Stevenson in short, pulsating paragraphs, as I read out with Shannon earlier. And I could go on. Philip and I talked earlier about how Amelia Dukas only gets one scene in the book, as opposed to TV where she keeps coming back. On TV, those scenes are terrific. Sylvia Coleridge is great, and Tom Baker later mentioned, on the Robots of Death DVD audio commentary, that he pitched her as a companion when Graham Williams took over the show a year later. Of course, Tom also reportedly pitched a talking cabbage as a companion, so perhaps we can take that suggestion advisedly. But I keep finding new wisdom in Amelia Dukas' scene, like when she's boring and impatient and clearly has more important things to do Sir Colin in Part 5, like fend off a lethal alien vegetable invasion perhaps, but she's telling him war stories and she's insulting civil servants, which he just happens to be. Having worked as a civil servant, I get that now. But Seeds of Doom on TV is not a single 45-minute episode or a 90-minute movie. It's a serial, a 6-week affair, a mini soap opera. Seeds of Doom on TV needs characters like Amelia. We call them padding now. Many Doctor Who fans, when shown a 6-part serial, will watch it all in one go and declare, "That was 2 episodes too long." But for a story airing 25 minutes a week for 6 weeks, you have to have Sylvia Coleridge as comic relief, as flavor, as texture. You can't just have giant plants throttling butlers or characters running through Mick Jagger's impressively manicured gardens for 25 straight minutes every Saturday for a month and a half. You need quiet scenes with characters talking over a desk. I think Amelia Dukas is great on TV. Speaking to Philip earlier, though, and getting his perspective on what scenes and lines of dialogue he chose to retain for the book, I understand now, in a way I didn't when I was 11 or 12, why all that stuff disappears for the book. The book is 50,000 words and is not there to tell a 6-week serial. It doesn't need padding, or flavor, or texture. It doesn't need detours and sidesteps about, well, let's give a listen.
Come on, come on. Not exactly rushing themselves, are they?
Perhaps we should have gone back into the grounds.
No, too dangerous. I wonder what has happened to Dunbar.
Of course, there were these armed men running about.
Must have been quite terrifying.
Not a bit. I enjoyed it. I like a little excitement. Besides, I have some wartime experience, you know. Yes. I was a sergeant in the ATS. Manned an ack gun at Folkestone.
Indeed. Yes, yes. This is Sir Colin Thackeray. I am aware that the Brigadier is in Geneva. Yes. I must speak to a senior officer. This is a matter of national security. Yes, national security.
Invent a code word. They love that. What about Operation Nut House?
What? Major Beresford? All right, get him down here, fast. Thank you.
Bravo.
What a nitwit.
That's the stuff to give them. After all, our taxes pay for these wretched civil servants, and you can never get hold of them when you want them, can you?
I am a civil servant, Miss Ducat.
Then you know exactly what I mean, of course.
Of course. Well, now, I think it's time you ran along and got some sleep.
Well, I'm not sleepy.
Thank you very much for all you've done.
Not at all. But I do hope you'll be able to get some help to the doctor and that dear child, that
Yes.
little girl, before it's too late.
We'll do our best. Yes, thank you.
Consider me available for any future assignments, Sir Colin.
Oh, yes, yes, I will. Yes, thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
The book was not written to tell a light-hearted comedy of manners. In short, it is there to tell a story about giant plants, throttling butlers. It doesn't have to have Sarah and the Doctor cracking wise. Now, it does contain a lot of the wonderful Tom Baker, John Challis byplay that we heard earlier. The book retains, what happened to him? Wolfgang Amadeus? Oh, him. He died. and the Doctor quoting the house that Jack built, but the book mostly strips to the action. Here is how Philip introduces Tony Beckley's character. There was something menacing about Harrison Chase. Lean and panther-like, he had the unmistakable stamp of power, a man not to be trifled with, a man who would stop at nothing to get his own way. That says it all, doesn't it? And in the best Terrence Dicks tradition, Hinchcliffe comments on the action and editorializes. While delaying Scorby and the Part 2 material, the Doctor, quote, smiled sweetly like a benevolent hotel proprietor. When the Doctor makes jokes about insect infestations in Chase's plant museum in the Part 3 material, Chase's expression, quote, turned sour. Hinchcliffe effortlessly preserves the amazing TV performances from Seeds in asides such as these, and his prose is breathless. While he's not in as many scenes in the book as he was on TV, Dunbar the character, the corrupt civil servant, attempting to cash in on the discovery of the crinoid pod by selling its location to Chase, is necessary for the book, and his death gives us the Part 4 cliffhanger on TV. Here is how Philip wrote it. As he struggled through the creepers and bushes, Dunbar cursed his own weakness. Greed, the ancient vice of man, had ensnared him into a lurid web of murder and betrayal. Now, in this tangled wilderness, which plucked his clothes and tore at his skin, he was discovering the price of his folly. That is evocative prose, technically flawless, and poignant. It dips into the head of the character as he dies on TV, elevates the moment. Shannon earlier had praised for how Philip improved the Part 3 cliffhanger in the book, and I think Dunbar's death at the Part 4 cliffhanger is improved just as much. Part 6 on TV takes up just about 16 pages of text in the Pinnacle edition. The last 2 episodes on TV had not only phenomenal action, the full-sized crinoid prop looks really, really good, one of the last 1970s Doctor Who special effects that hasn't aged, but also crackling, sparkling dialogue. Hinchcliffe compresses this material to its bare bones. The action is still breathless, though, and benefits from hearing it read aloud. When Scorby dies, and I'll tell you, the day that Part 6 first aired on my PBS station, I spent the whole afternoon hoping against hope that John Challis's character got to survive the story and stay reformed. I was hooked on this moment. Hinchcliffe in the book again takes us inside the character's head and writes the moment about as well as you can write any death scene. Quote, then, from nowhere, he felt a tangle of weeds wrap around his legs beneath the water. They were pulling him down. He lunged and thrashed about, but the weeds were now around his body, trapping his arms, dragging him down, down, down beneath the icy water. With a final swirl, the waters closed over Scorby's head, and he disappeared below the surface. The writhing weeds subsided, their deadly purpose accomplished. The final Antarctica by TARDIS scene disappears too, leaving us only with a final image of Sir Colin watching the TARDIS dematerialize from the World Ecology Bureau parking lot. He, quote, shook his head as if he had seen a ghost. And that's the book. The comedy value of that Antarctica scene was a gift for Tom and Liz, but not particularly funny, and it's probably one thing subtracted for the book that actually helps the novelization by not being there. As an adaptation of one of the Hinchcliffe era's best gothic horror thrillers, Seeds of Doom as a novelization is a very different creature than its TV parent. It's shorter, and with different emphasis. While it doesn't adapt the TV story scene for scene or word for word, it finds the root of the story and builds that out into a pretty memorable action-adventure horror tale. If you don't think about the scenes that are missing and you focus instead on the absolute value of the prose that's left behind, it's really powerful, like a 60-foot crinoid crushing the Chase mansion beneath its tentacles. Philip came back to write 2 more books, including the story that aired next after Seeds on TV, The Mask of Mandragora. That novelization is very different from Seeds, longer, arguably more faithful to the TV serial. But it's also a second-time writer who's improved his craft and learned more about storytelling. We'll come back to that book in about 3 more months, and without spoiling anything, I think you'll love the guest lineup for that one, too. But next time, on Doctor Who Literature, it's March 1977. In the USA, Jimmy Carter has been president for about 2 months. In Florida, the New York Mets gathered in St. Petersburg for spring training, blissfully unaware that the worst trade in franchise history was just 3 months away and was going to break the hearts of a generation of young baseball fans. In New York, I was about 3.5 years away from discovering Doctor Who, and in print, the Target novelizations go back to the beginning, our first William Hartnell-era novelization in over a year. It's the last story of Doctor Who's first production block, it's the last story to feature Carol Ann Ford as a regular, and it's one of the all-time great TV stories, The Dalek Invasion of Earth, written by the longest-serving author in the Target line, Terrance Dicks. And we'll be joined by a guest who would have seen the original episode on TV when it aired, and who can tell us a thing or two about Terry Nation. It may be forbidden to dump bodies in the river, but it is required to listen to next week's episode. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Doctor Who Literature Podcast. I'm Jason, your host and editor. This episode was produced by David Barsky. Special thanks to my special guests, Shannon Dohar and Mr. Philip Hinchcliffe. This podcast can now be found on iTunes and Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and most of your podcast apps of choice. You can find all past episodes at anchor.fm/DoctorWhoLit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe so others can find us. You can find me on Twitter at Doctor Who Novels, that's Dr. Who Novels, and you can also find me on the Trap One podcast. I write about Doctor Who on Twitter using the hashtag Doctor Who Pilgrimage, that's Dr. Who Pilgrimage. Please drop me a line with your comments, questions, and suggestions. Next time we'll be discussing another novelization, and we'll be joined by a very special guest. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.